College Writing Oral Report Research Paper Proposal by Michael Chiango for College Writing 1, September 16, 2020. How the Abrahamic Religions Affect Societal Attitudes Towards Sex. Sex is an incredibly important aspect of humanity, for without it, none of us would exist here today. Indeed, sex is the reason we see the great variety and diversity present in nature that we do. Being such an important part of life, nearly all human beings who have undergone sexual maturity, outside of approximately 1% of the population that is asexual, experience some form of sexual desire on a regular basis. However, although a major and natural part of our lives, and the function by which humans have reproduced throughout our inception, societal values about sex can and have greatly varied from culture to culture and subculture to subculture throughout time. Seeing as how religion has played a critical role in informing and enforcing cultural norms and values in nearly every single society that has ever existed, it is only natural to conclude that the religious faiths practiced by a particular society will affect that society's attitudes towards sex and reproduction. There is scarcely a single religion in the world that has been dreamed up by humans that has not had its own precepts and commands regarding sexual conduct, and they all vary greatly. For instance, many religious cultures such as Buddhism, Wiccan, paganism, and New Age do not have a problem with homosexuality, while religions like Hinduism are opposed to it. Currently, slightly over half the population of the planet, or approximately 3.8 billion people, are self-described adherents of one of the Abrahamic religions. These are religions that worship the monotheistic God of the patriarch Abram, father of Isaac and Ishmael, and include most denominations of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Being cut from the same cloth, many of the different varieties of the Abrahamic religions have somewhat similar attitudes toward human sexuality, although more fringe subgroups can have wildly varying interpretations of scriptural precepts, and it is important to examine these attitudes and how they affect their religious adherents, particularly because the Abrahamic faiths have such a wide influence on humanity throughout the earth. Some interpretations of the Abrahamic God's dogma regarding human sexuality hold to the view that sex is a divine act and a gift from God to humans, while other interpretations hold to the view that sex is an unholy product of sinful flesh that must be fought against with the strength of the Spirit. Regardless of which interpretation is endorsed by its adherents, however, there is a fundamental aspect of authoritarian control over private sexual activities that are utterly endemic in the Abrahamic faiths, that produce a deeply corrosive effect on society, manifesting itself in everything from misogyny towards women, to marginalization of deviant sexual orientations, to purity culture and internalized shame. When discussing sexual morality with an adherent of the Abrahamic faiths, one thing that often seems to be brought up is the idea that God's precepts are not really an arbitrary instrument of control, but instead a set of important guidelines, since simply succumbing to every sexual desire one possesses will lead to ruin and degeneracy. Of course, suggestions and guidelines for sexual conduct are important, provided they are reasonable and conform to a humanistic perspective. In other words, sexual acts that cause direct harm to others or intrude into their lives, like, aka rape, child molestation, voyeurism, etc., should be frowned upon and carry penalties, while sexual acts that do not, aka self-determining prostitution, consensual sex outside of marriage, homosexual acts, etc., should be accepted by society as the right of an individual to engage in at their discretion, and not carry penalties. The Abrahamic faiths, however, are far from humanistic, and rather than putting prime emphasis on human well-being and autonomy, they instead put prime emphasis on conforming to God's will and pleasing Him. This means that, from a monotheistic Abrahamic perspective, God, who is Lord of all creation, can arbitrarily dictate sexual morality based on nothing more than His likes and dislikes. Both the Jewish Old Testament in Leviticus 20:13 and the Islamic Hadith in Sunan Abu Dawud 38:4447 prescribed the penalty of death for the act of male homosexuality, and Paul, the most important figure in the Christian New Testament outside of Jesus Christ, declared that homosexuality was a sin equivalent to murder and deserving of death in Romans 1:24-32. There is, of course, no humanistic rationality for why two people of the same gender should not be able to engage in consensual sexual intercourse with one another, but since the Abrahamic faiths uphold divine law that cannot be amended, there is no need for a rational justification because it is simply God's will. Of course, if there is a God who created the universe, it is almost certain that their divine will does not include hatred of homosexuality or any of the other oppressive laws in the scriptures containing sexuality for that matter. The omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent creator of the entire universe would most likely care very little for the primates known as Homo sapiens residing on the planet Earth, much less care what those primates do with their genitals. The so-called sacred texts that the adherents of the Abrahamic religions abide by are evidently created by human beings and used by the ruling class in the past and present as mechanisms of control. After all, exerting control over a fundamental human desire and means of reproduction is a highly effective tool of controlling society at large. One must look no further than the abortion debate that continually rages on in American society today. It is a common misconception that the Holy Bible condemns abortion. In reality, there is no such law forbidding it, and in Numbers 5:11-31, God specifically endorses abortion in cases of marital infidelity. However, this passage specifically states that it is the right of the man to procure an abortion for his wife if he thinks that she has cheated on him, and the woman has no say in the matter. It is nothing less than expected that when the courts decided that a woman had the right to control her own reproductive system in Roe v. Wade in 1973, Christian influencers everywhere proclaimed abortion to be a horrible offense to God's will. In actuality, it was an offense to the male-dominated clergy of the nation, who used the idea of God to justify exercising control over women. The Abrahamic scriptures already taught that women were second-class citizens, so there was never a need to originally clarify that women did not have the right to obtain an abortion for themselves. What is so disturbing about the Abrahamic faiths is that their opponents try to sell this dogmatic observance of authority in sexual matters as true freedom from the slavery of vice and sin. A terrifying example of this is a recently uploaded video by the Christian YouTuber Unworthy Servant Malachi titled Identifying and Overcoming All Forms of Sexual Immorality, where he proclaims that every single sexual act and lustful thought is wrong and sinful and could lead to eternal damnation in hell, outside of plain heterosexual intercourse within the confines of marriage. He paints these extremely restrictive edicts that he justifies with Scripture as freedom to indulge the spirit rather than the flesh.
Because they believe that they can fight flesh with flesh. You fight flesh with Jesus. You must walk in the newness of life by walking in the Spirit.
Some varieties of the Abrahamic faiths use a more deceptive method of controlling human sexuality. Pope John Paul II, whose teaching on the theology of the body still largely informs Catholic doctrine on sexuality today, spoke of a sex-positive, quote-unquote, interpretation of Christian theology, where sexual love could help humans more fully understand the divine meaning of existence. This, quote-unquote, sex-positive interpretation of Scripture also proclaims that every single sexual act and lustful thought is wrong and sinful and could lead to an eternal damnation in hell, outside of plain heterosexual intercourse within the confines of marriage. It is a more endearing way of spouting the same controlling puritanical doctrine. When observing the ways in which the Abrahamic traditions have been used to promote such stunting views on human sexuality, and when observing the backwards doctrine on sexuality espoused in the holy text that those religions are based upon, it is a great mystery, and a great insult to everyone who has ever been shamed, marginalized, or killed because of the teachings of Abrahamic religions on sexuality, how gay Christians can claim that the Bible is a queer positive text, or how Muslim women can claim that Islam is a pillar of feminism.
Historically, this has been Christianity's typical MO. Fight a war against progress, lose that war against progress, and when that progress turns out to be a good thing after all, claim credit for that progress. Christianity fights and fights and fights, and when it finally loses, it pretends the fight never took place, and then plagiarizes the winner.
The Abrahamic religion's relationship with human sexuality is a self-destructive and harmful one, and the large volumes of former followers of Abrahamic religions who have come forth to reveal that their religion contributed to a deeply unhealthy sense of their sexuality can absolutely back that up.